you know that feeling when you're completely alone in your house at night, and suddenly every creak, every shadow, every ordinary sound becomes something else entirely? That primal fear that makes your heart race, even though you know logically that you're safe. I used to think that fear was just our imagination playing tricks on us, that it was some evolutionary leftover from when our ancestors had real predators to worry about. But I've learned something far more disturbing. Sometimes, that fear isn't irrational at all. Sometimes, it's the only thing standing between us and a reality we're not equipped to handle. What I'm about to share with you tonight isn't just entertainment. These are 3 accounts that were sent to me by people who experienced something that changed their understanding of what's possible in this world. Each story involves someone who was alone completely, utterly alone when they discovered that certain objects, certain seemingly innocent things, can carry within them a power that defies explanation. The question that haunts me, and the one I want you to consider as we journey through these tales together, is this: what if the things we surround ourselves with, the objects we bring into our most intimate spaces, aren't as passive as we believe? What if some of them are waiting patiently for the right moment, the right person to reveal their true nature? Before we begin, I need your help. If these stories resonate with you, if they tap into something deep and unsettling within your own experience, please hit that like button. Your support helps us reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers, and honestly, knowing that others share these fears makes them feel less isolating. And please, comment below, tell me about your own experiences with objects that seem to have a life of their own, or times when being alone felt like something more than just solitude. This is Dr. Bonechill, and tonight, we're going to explore 3 true accounts of what happens when solitude becomes something far more sinister. Story 1. The music box. First time I saw the music box, I thought it was beautiful. It was sitting on a dusty shelf in Henderson's antique shop, tucked between a collection of faded photographs and a set of china dolls that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The music box was small, probably no bigger than my palm, carved from what looked like dark walnut wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite, intricate vine patterns wrapped around its edges, and on the lid, a tiny brass nameplate read Clara in delicate script. I've been browsing antique shops for weeks, trying to find the perfect gift for my girlfriend Sarah's birthday. She had this thing for vintage items, especially music boxes. She collected them, actually. Her apartment was filled with them, Victorian ones, Art Deco pieces, even some from the 1920s that still played perfectly, but I'd never seen one quite like this. That's been here for about 3 months, Mr. Henderson said, appearing beside me with that uncanny way shop owners have of materializing when you're interested in something. Previous owner said it belonged to his grandmother, Clara, I assume. He gestured to the nameplate. He seemed pretty eager to get rid of it. To be honest, I picked it up, surprised by how heavy it felt for such a small object. The wood was smooth, almost warm to the touch, and when I lifted the lid, a tiny ballerina in a faded pink tutu spun slowly to a melody I didn't recognize. The tune was haunting, beautiful in a melancholy way that made something in my chest tighten. How much? I asked. $40. It seemed reasonable for something so beautifully crafted. I paid cash and took it home, planning to wrap it up for Sarah's birthday the following week. But that night, something strange happened. I placed the music box on my nightstand, still in its small paper bag, before going to bed. I live alone, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building, the kind with thin walls, and neighbors who work normal hours, so by midnight, everything is usually dead quiet. I'm a light sleeper, always have been, so when I heard the music, I woke up immediately. It was the same melody from the music box, but muffled, like it was playing from inside something. I lay there for a moment, trying to orient myself, and then I realized it was coming from the nightstand, from the bag. I sat up, heart beating a little faster than it should have been. I hadn't wound the music box. In fact, I was pretty sure I'd closed the lid after testing it at the shop, but there it was, playing that same haunting melody in the darkness of my bedroom. I reached over and pulled the box from the bag. The lid was open and the tiny ballerina was spinning slowly, her painted face catching the streetlight from my window. I watched her for a moment, mesmerized by the way she turned, graceful and precise, until the music wound down and she came to a stop. Must have been wound tighter than I thought, I muttered to myself. Closing the lid firmly, I put the box back in the bag and tried to go back to sleep. But something about the incident left me unsettled. It took me another hour to drift off, The next night, it happened again. This time, I was more alert. When I woke up, the music seemed louder, more present, and when I looked at the nightstand, I could see the faint glow of the streetlight reflecting off the open lid. The ballerina was spinning again, but something was different. Instead of her usual slow, graceful turns, she seemed to be moving faster, more urgently. I grabbed the box and examined it more carefully. The mechanism looked old, but well maintained. There was no obvious reason why it would start playing on its own. Music boxes need to be wound, and I distinctly remembered not winding it the day before. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the box. I would place it on my dresser before bed, making sure the lid was closed, and without fail, I would wake up to that melody playing. Each time, the lid would be open, and Clara, that's what I'd started calling it. Ballerina would be spinning, but it was more than just the music that was bothering me. It was the way I felt when I watched her dance. There was something desperate about her movements, something that made me think of a trapped animal pacing in a cage, and the melody itself was starting to get under my skin. I would catch myself humming it during the day, and sometimes I would wake up with it already playing in my head. Sarah's birthday came and went. I ended up buying her a different gift, a vintage jewelry box I found at another shop. I told myself it was because I wanted to keep the Clara box for myself, but the truth was, I was starting to feel possessive about it. The idea of giving it away made me genuinely anxious. That's when I knew something was wrong. I'm not the type of person who gets attached to objects. I'm practical, rational. I don't believe in haunted items or cursed antiques. But there was something about that music box that had gotten its hooks into me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara the ballerina was trying to tell me something. It was 3 weeks after I'd bought the box that I finally understood what that something was. I'd been having the same dream for several nights in a row. In the dream, I was in a house I didn't recognize, old, Victorian, with heavy curtains and dark wood paneling. I was always in the same room, a bedroom with a canopy bed and a vanity table covered in perfume bottles and jewelry. And on the vanity, there was the music box, but it was larger in the dream, more elaborate. And when I opened it, Clara didn't just spin, she danced with purpose, her tiny arms reaching out as if she were trying to grab onto something. In the dream, I could hear her voice, thin and desperate. "Find me, please, find me." I woke up from that dream with my heart pounding and the melody playing in my head so clearly that I thought the box had started up again. But when I looked at the nightstand, it was silent. The lid closed just as I left it. That's when I decided to do some research. I started with the basics, trying to find out more about the music box's history. Mr. Henderson had mentioned that the previous owner had inherited it from his grandmother. So I went back to the shop to see if I could get more details. "Oh, you're asking about the Clara box," Henderson said when I described it. "Yeah, that was an interesting situation. The fellow who brought it in, Marcus Webb, said his grandmother had kept it locked away in her attic for decades, only found it when they were cleaning out her house after she passed. He said she used to tell stories about it when he was a kid, claimed it was cursed, or some such nonsense." "What kind of stories?" Henderson shrugged. "The usual stuff. Said it belonged to a young woman who died tragically, and her spirit was trapped inside. You know how these old family legends go, gets more dramatic with each telling." I asked for Marcus Webb's contact information, but Henderson said he didn't have it. The man had paid cash and hadn't left any details, but he did remember one thing. Webb had mentioned that his grandmother lived on Maple Street in one of the old Victorian houses. There are only 5 Victorian houses on Maple Street, and it took me to days of knocking on doors and asking neighbors to figure out which one had belonged to Webb's grandmother. It was the house at the end of the street, a beautiful but rundown 3-story with a wraparound porch and intricate gingerbread trim. The current owners, a young couple named the Johnsons, had bought it just 6 months earlier. They were friendly and curious when I explained what I was looking for, and they invited me in to look around. "We're still finding things the previous owners left behind," Mrs. Johnson said as she led me through the house. "Mostly junk, but some interesting pieces. The old woman who lived here before was apparently quite the collector." The house was exactly as I'd seen it in my dreams. When we reached the 2nd floor, I stopped dead in front of a bedroom door. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the room from my dreams. I asked if I could look inside, and when Mrs. Johnson opened the door, I saw the canopy bed, the vanity table, even the heavy curtains, all exactly as they had appeared. In my sleep, this was the master bedroom, Mrs. Johnson explained. "We're planning to renovate it. but we haven't gotten around to it yet. Most of the furniture came with the house. I walked over to the vanity table, my hands shaking. There, in the dust, I could see the outline of a small rectangular object about the size of a music box. Was there anything on this table when you moved in? I asked. Mrs. Johnson thought for a moment. I think there was. A small wooden box of some kind. The grandson took it when he came to collect the personal items. I explained about the music box, about the dreams, about the feeling that something was trying to communicate with me. I expected them to think I was crazy, but Mrs. Johnson just nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting, she said. The neighbors told us that the old woman, Mrs. Webb, used to talk about her great-grandmother Clara, said she died young, back in the 1920s. Apparently, Clara was engaged to be married, but she died in a car accident just a week before the wedding. Mrs. Webb always claimed that Clara's spirit never left the house. Did she ever mention a music box? Not specifically, but she did say that Clara used to dance, that she was quite good at it. Actually, there are some old photographs downstairs if you'd like to see them. The photographs were in an album the previous owner had left behind. Most of them were from the 1940s and 50s, but there were a few older ones, including one that made my blood run cold. It was dated 1923, and it showed a young woman in a white dress, posed in a dance position. She was beautiful, with dark hair and sad eyes, and written on the back in faded ink was a single name, Clara. She looked exactly like the ballerina in the music box, down to the melancholy expression on her painted face. I spent the rest of the afternoon looking through the album, learning about Clara's life. She had been 22 when she died, just a week before her wedding to a man named Thomas. According to the newspaper clipping Mrs. Webb had saved, Clara had been driving to meet her fiancé when her car skidded on a patch of ice and hit a tree. She died instantly. Thomas never married. He kept Clara's engagement ring, her dance shoes, and the music box he'd given her as a wedding gift. When he died 40 years later, he left everything to Clara's younger sister, Mrs. Webb's grandmother. The music box had been passed down through the family for nearly a century, but according to Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Webb had always been afraid of it. She claimed that Clara's spirit was trapped inside, trying to communicate with the living. Mrs. Webb used to say that Clara was looking for Thomas. Mrs. Johnson explained that she didn't understand why he never came to find her. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the voice from my dreams. Find me, please. Find me. That night, I placed the music box on my nightstand and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the music started playing. I sat up and watched Clara spin. But this time, instead of feeling unsettled, I felt profoundly sad. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to tell me her story. I know who you are, I whispered to the tiny dancing figure. I know what happened to you. The ballerina seemed to spin faster, more urgently, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw her turn her head toward me just slightly, just enough to make eye contact. Thomas never stopped loving you, I continued. He kept your things. He never forgot you. The music began to slow, and Clara's spinning grew gentler, more peaceful. As the melody wound down, I felt something shift in the room, a sense of release, of completion. The music box hasn't played on its own since that night. Clara still spins when I wind it, but her movements are different now, graceful and serene, rather than desperate. Sometimes I catch myself winding it just to watch her dance, and I feel a strange sense of companionship, as if I'm not quite as alone as I thought. I've thought about returning the music box to the antique shop, or even giving it to a collector who might appreciate its history, but something stops me every time. Maybe it's because I understand now that Clara isn't trapped anymore, she's just present. And sometimes, when the apartment feels too quiet, when the loneliness gets overwhelming, I find myself grateful for her company, because here's what I've learned. Being alone doesn't always mean being lonely. Sometimes it means being chosen to listen to a story that needs to be told. And sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do for someone, even someone who's been gone for nearly a century, is simply to acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered, that their love was real. The music box sits on my nightstand now, and every night before I go to sleep, I whisper, "Good night, Clara." I like to think it brings her peace. I know it brings me some, but I also know that there are other objects out there, other stories waiting to be heard, and that's a thought that keeps me awake sometimes, wondering what else might be trying to communicate with us from the spaces between what we know and what we fear to believe. Story 2. The Polaroid camera's second story comes from a man named David, and it's about something that should have been a simple purchase of vintage camera he found at a garage sale. But as you'll learn, sometimes the most innocent objects carry the heaviest burdens. I've always been into photography, but not the digital kind. There's something about film photography that appeals to me, the deliberate nature of it. The way you have to think about each shot because you can't just delete the ones that don't work out. So when I saw the Polaroid camera at Mrs. Peterson's garage sale, I knew I had to have it. It was a classic SX70, the kind they made in the 1970s with the folding design and the leather body. Mrs. Peterson said it had belonged to her late husband, who'd been an amateur photographer. The camera looked like it had been well cared for, and when I tested the focusing mechanism, everything seemed to work perfectly. Harold loved that camera. Mrs. Peterson said as I examined it, he took it everywhere, said there was something magical about instant photos, the way they developed right in front of your eyes. She was asking $30 for it, which seemed like a steal. Vintage Polaroids in good condition usually go for twice that on eBay. I paid her and took it home, along with a pack of film I'd bought online the week before. My apartment is on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District. It's a studio space with high ceilings and large windows that let in great natural light, perfect for photography. I'd been living there for about 2 years, and I'd never felt uncomfortable being alone there. The building is old, but it's solid, and the neighbors are quiet artists and young professionals who keep to themselves. That first night with the camera, I took a few test shots around the apartment. The film was expired, but not by much, so I expected the colors to be a little off. What I didn't expect was what I saw when the photos developed. The first photo was of my living room, shot from near the entrance. Normal composition, nothing unusual, but as the image emerged from the gray chemical haze, I noticed something that made me look twice. There was a figure in the background, near the windows. It was blurry, indistinct, but it looked like a person, standing with their back to the camera. I looked up from the photo to the actual living room, empty. Of course, just my furniture and the evening light filtering through the windows. I chalked it up to the expired film, maybe some kind of double exposure from a previous roll. Vintage cameras sometimes have quirks like that. I took another photo, this time of my kitchen. Same thing. As the photo developed, I could see my kitchen table, my small breakfast nook, the vintage refrigerator I'd bought when I moved in. But there, sitting at the table, was the shadow of a figure, not clear enough to make out details, but definitely human shape. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to be rational. It had to be a technical issue. Maybe the film had been exposed to light, or there was something wrong with the camera's mirror system. I decided to test it further. Over the next hour, I took 12 more photos, documenting every corner of my apartment. Each one showed the same thing, shadowy figures in the background, always positioned as if they were occupying the space naturally, but never quite in focus. In the bedroom photo, there was someone lying on the bed. In the bathroom shot, a figure stood in the shower. In the photo of my work desk, someone was sitting in my chair. By the time I'd gone through half the pack of film, my hands were shaking. I spread all the photos out on my kitchen table and studied them under the bright overhead light. The figures were consistent, always in the same positions, always just out of focus, always there. But here's the thing that really got to me. In every photo, the figures seemed to be looking at the camera, even though I couldn't make out their faces. There was something about their posture, their positioning, that suggested they were aware of being photographed. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about those shadowy figures, wondering if they were still there, just outside my vision. I found myself getting up to check the corners of my apartment, turning on lights, looking for evidence of what? I didn't even know. The next morning, I decided to do some research. I went back to Mrs. Peterson's house and asked her more about her husband's photography. Oh, Harold was obsessed with that camera, she said, inviting me in for coffee, especially toward the end. He was convinced he was capturing something special with it. What kind of something? Mrs. Peterson looked uncomfortable. Well, this is going to sound strange, but Harold believed he was photographing spirits. He said the camera could see things the human eye couldn't. She led me to a study that had been converted into a makeshift darkroom. The walls were covered with Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, all taken with the same camera I'd bought. And in every single one, I could see the same kind of shadowy figures I captured in my apartment. Harold took these over the course of about 6 months, Mrs. Peterson explained. He became convinced that our house was haunted, that the camera was showing him proof of paranormal activity. He would spend hours taking photos, documenting every room, every corner. I studied the photos more closely. They were all of this house, the same house where I was now standing, but in each one, there were the figures, sometimes one, sometimes several, always positioned as if they belonged there. Did you ever see anything? I asked. Without the camera, I mean. Mrs. Peterson shook her head. Never. The house always felt normal to me. But Harold started to change. He became obsessed with the idea that these spirits were trying to communicate with him. He would stay up all night, taking photos, waiting for them to reveal themselves more clearly. She showed me a journal Harold had kept, filled with notes about his photography sessions. The entries started normal enough technical observations about lighting and composition. But as they progressed, they became more frantic, more desperate. Day 23, the figure in the kitchen moved. Same position as yesterday, but turned slightly toward the camera. I think it knows I'm watching. Day 31. Took 15 photos of the living room. The figure by the window was in all of them. But in the last photo, it was closer to the camera. How is that possible? Day 45. I can feel them watching me even when I'm not taking photos. The camera isn't just capturing them, it's making them aware of me. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Harold's death. Day 52. I understand now. The camera isn't showing me spirits that are already here. It's calling them. Every photo I take brings them closer to our world. I have to stop, but I can't. I need to see them clearly. I need to know what they want. Mrs. Peterson closed the journal. Harold died of a heart attack in his sleep. I found him in the morning, still clutching the camera. There was an undeveloped photo next to him on the nightstand. What was in the photo? I never looked at it. I was too afraid. I put it in the camera bag with everything else and tried to forget about it. I felt my mouth go dry. Where's the photo now? Still in the camera bag. I gave you everything that was with the camera. I left the camera bag in my car. I've been so excited about the camera itself that I hadn't bothered to check what else was in the bag. As soon as I got home, I went down to the parking garage and retrieved it inside, along with some cleaning supplies and extra film. Was a single undeveloped Polaroid photo. It was still sealed in its protective covering, the chemicals waiting to be activated. I stood there in my apartment, holding the photo, knowing that once I exposed it to light, there would be no going back. Whatever Harold had captured in his final moment would be revealed, but I had to know. I pulled the protective covering off and watched as the image slowly developed. At first, it was just the usual gray chemical haze. Then, gradually, shapes began to emerge. I could see Harold's bedroom, the same room where he died. The perspective was strange, though the photo seemed to be taken from the ceiling, looking down at the bed, and there, lying in the bed, was Harold. But he wasn't alone. Surrounding the bed, clear as day, were dozens of figures, not shadowy this time, but distinct, detailed, human. They were all looking down at Harold with expressions of hunger, curiosity. I couldn't tell, but there was something predatory about their posture, something that made my skin crawl. But what terrified me most was what I saw in the corner of the photo, standing apart from the others, looking directly at the camera with perfect clarity, was a figure I recognized. It was me, not someone who looked like me. It was definitely me, down to the scar on my chin from a childhood accident and the specific way I styled my hair. But it was me as I looked right now, not as I would have looked when Harold was alive. I dropped the photo and backed away from it, my heart pounding. This was impossible. Harold had died 2 months before I'd even heard about the camera. There was no way I could be in a photo he'd taken, but there I was, standing among the figures, looking directly at the camera with an expression I didn't recognize on my own face. That night, I couldn't bring myself to touch the camera. I left it on my kitchen table and tried to go about my normal routine. But I kept thinking about the photo, about the impossibility of what I'd seen. I must have checked the locks on my door a dozen times, and I left every light in the apartment on. Around 3 a.m., I heard the sound. It was subtle at first, a faint whirring, like a motor starting up. Then I heard the distinctive mechanical click of a camera shutter, followed by the whir of a Polaroid photo being ejected. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The sounds were coming. From the kitchen, I crept out of my bedroom and peered around the corner. The camera was still on the table where I'd left it, but there was a fresh photo lying next to it. The photo was still developing, the chemicals swirling and forming shapes. I approached it slowly, afraid of what I might see. As the image clarified, I felt my knees go weak. It was a photo of my bedroom, taken from the doorway where I was currently standing, and there, in the bed, was a figure under the covers, me, asleep, unaware of being photographed. But surrounding the bed, just as in Harold's final photo, were the figures, dozens of them, all looking down at my sleeping form with that same predatory interest. I spun around, expecting to see them behind me, but the apartment was empty. Just me, the camera, and the impossible photo. I grabbed the camera and ran to the window, intending to throw it out into the alley below. But as I lifted it up, I caught sight of my reflection in the black window glass, and standing behind my reflection, barely visible, but definitely there, was one of the figures. I dropped the camera and turned around. Nothing. But when I looked back at the window, the figure was still there, standing behind my reflection, watching me with hollow eyes. That's when I understood what Harold had written in his journal. The camera wasn't just capturing spirits that were already there. It was calling them, bringing them closer to our world with each photo. And now they were here, in my apartment, drawn by the camera's impossible ability to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. The camera sat on my kitchen table, silent now, but I could sense its presence like a malevolent heartbeat. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I took the camera back to Mrs. Peterson. I can't keep this, I told her, explaining what had happened. Something's wrong with it. It's not safe. Mrs. Peterson looked at the camera with sad recognition. I was afraid of this. Harold warned me that whoever inherited the camera would experience the same thing. He said the spirits were drawn to it, that they would follow it wherever it went. Then why did you sell it? Because I thought if I got rid of it, they would leave me alone. But they didn't, did they? They're still here, waiting for the camera to return. I looked around her house, and for the first time, I noticed the small details I'd missed before. The way the shadows seemed to move independently of their sources, the cold spots near the windows, the feeling of being watched that I'd attributed to my own paranoia. How do we stop this? I asked. Mrs. Peterson shook her head. I don't think we can. Harold believed that the camera was some kind of gateway, that it had been manufactured with materials that made it sensitive to spiritual energy. He thought that every photo taken with it weakened the barrier between worlds. So what do? We wait, and we hope that eventually they'll lose interest and move on. I left the camera with Mrs. Peterson and went home, but I knew it wasn't over. The figures were still there, still watching, still waiting. I could feel them in the peripheral vision of my mind, just out of sight, but always present. It's been 3 months now, and they're still with me. Not as strong as they were when I had the camera, but there. I've learned to live with the knowledge that I'm not alone, that there are things in this world that exist just beyond the edge of our perception. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Harold's journal entry about the camera calling to them. I wonder if that's what happened to me of my interest in vintage photography. My willingness to believe in the impossible made me a target, or if it was just random chance that led me to that garage sale, to that camera, to this strange half-life, where I exist in the space between the living and the dead. I don't take photos anymore. I can't, because I know now that some things are better left unseen, some barriers better left unbroken. And I know that somewhere out there, that camera is still waiting for its next owner, ready to show them things they were never meant to see. The most terrifying part isn't the figures themselves, it's the knowledge that they're patient. They have all the time in the world to wait for the right moment, the right person, the right weakness to exploit. And once they've found you, once they've made the connection, there's no going back. You become part of their world, whether you want to or not. Story 3, the mirror final story I want to share with you tonight, is perhaps the most disturbing of all, because it involves something we all have in our homes, something we use every day without thinking about its potential for horror. This account comes from a woman named Rebecca, and it's about a mirror that showed her more than just her reflection. I moved into the house on Elm Street in October, right after my divorce was finalized. It was a rental 1950s ranch-style home, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. After 2 years of living in cramped apartments while the divorce proceedings dragged on, I was excited to have a whole house to myself again. The house came partially furnished, which was perfect since I'd lost most of my belongings in the divorce settlement. The previous tenant had left behind some basic furniture, including a large mirror in the master bedroom. It was an antique piece, probably from the 1920s or 30s, with an ornate silver frame that had tarnished with age. The mirror itself was in excellent condition, no chips or scratches, and the reflection was crystal clear. I remember thinking it was beautiful, the kind of piece that would cost hundreds of dollars. In an antique shop, the landlord, Mr. Garrett, said I could keep it if I wanted. The previous tenant was quite attached to it, he mentioned as he showed me around. She'd had it for years. Apparently, when she moved out, she said she wanted to leave it for the next person who would appreciate it. I did appreciate it. The mirror was positioned perfectly opposite the bedroom window, and in the morning, it would catch the sunlight and reflect it around the room, making the space feel larger and brighter. I would stand in front of it each morning, getting ready for work, and I found the ritual comforting after the chaos of the divorce. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I was enjoying the solitude, the freedom to come and go as I pleased, to decorate and arrange things exactly how I wanted them. The house was quiet, almost too quiet sometimes, but I was getting used to living alone again. It was on a Thursday evening in late October that I first noticed something unusual. I was getting ready for bed, standing in front of the mirror while I brushed my teeth. The bedroom light was dim, just the bedside lamp casting a warm glow across the room. As I brushed, I noticed something in the mirror that made me pause. Behind my reflection, in the corner of the reflected room, there was someone else. I spun around immediately, my heart jumping into my throat. The bedroom was empty. No one was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, I could swear I saw a figure moving just at the edge of the reflection, always in my peripheral vision, never quite clear enough to focus on. I told myself it was just fatigue. I'd been working long hours, trying to rebuild my life after the divorce, and I was probably more stressed than I realized. Tricks of light and shadow, nothing more. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was more prepared. I was standing in front of the mirror, deliberately looking for anything unusual. For several minutes, everything appeared normal, just my reflection in the dimly lit bedroom. But then, as I watched, I saw movement in the mirror that didn't correspond to any movement I was making. In the reflection, someone was sitting on the edge of the bed behind me. I could see them clearly in the mirror, a woman in what looked like a white nightgown, her hair long and dark, her face turned away from me. She was sitting very still, as if she were waiting for something. But when I turned to look at the actual bed, there was nothing there. I stood there for what felt like an hour, turning back and forth between the mirror and the real room, but the figure only appeared in the reflection. In the mirror, she never moved, never looked at me directly, just sat there on the bed with her back to me, patient and still. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman in the mirror, about the way she'd been sitting so naturally, as if she belonged there. I found myself getting up every few hours to check the mirror, but in the darkness, I couldn't make out much of anything. The next morning, I called Mr. Garrett and asked him about the previous tenant. "Oh, Mrs. Chen," he said. "Nice lady, lived there for about 15 years. She was getting on in years, needed to move closer to her daughter." "Did she ever mention anything unusual about the house? Anything strange?" There was a pause. "Well, she did have some peculiar ideas about that mirror. Said it had been in her family for generations, that it was special somehow. She was very insistent that it stay with the house. What kind of special? I'm not sure exactly. She was always a bit eccentric." "Why do you ask?" I didn't know how to explain what I'd been seeing without sounding crazy, so I just said I was curious about the mirror's history. That evening, I decided to do some research. I started by examining the mirror more closely, looking for any markings or signatures that might tell me about its origins. On the back, I found a small brass plate that read Silverman & Sons, Fine Mirrors, Boston 1927. A quick internet search revealed that Silverman & Sons had been a family business that specialized in custom mirrors for wealthy clients. They'd gone out of business in the 1960s, but there were some records of their work in local historical societies. I found a phone number for the Boston Historical Society and called the next morning. The librarian I spoke with was helpful and curious about my inquiry. Silverman and Sons mirrors are quite rare, she said. They were known for their exceptional craftsmanship, but also for some rather unusual practices. The family claimed they had a special technique for creating mirrors that were more reflective than ordinary glass. What kind of technique? Well, this is where it gets interesting. According to the records we have, they incorporated silver that had been reclaimed from old jewelry and religious artifacts. They believed that objects with emotional significance would enhance the mirror's ability to reflect not just images, but, well, they called it the true nature of things. What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure. The records are a bit vague on the details, but there are several accounts from customers who claimed their Silverman mirrors showed them things that weren't there, or revealed aspects of their homes and lives that they hadn't been aware of. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of things? The accounts vary, but most involve seeing people or figures that weren't physically present. Some customers were delighted, claiming they could see deceased relatives or guardian spirits. Others were less pleased. Were there any complaints? Oh yes. Several customers demanded refunds, claiming the mirrors were haunted or cursed. But the Silverman family always insisted that the mirrors were simply showing people what was already there. They were just more sensitive to spiritual energy than ordinary mirrors. That night, I stood in front of the mirror with new understanding. If the librarian was right, if the mirror was designed to show more than just physical reality, then maybe what I was seeing wasn't a hallucination or a trick of light. Maybe it was something that had always been there, waiting for the right mirror to reveal it. The woman in the white nightgown was there again, sitting on the bed. But this time, I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I studied her reflection. Carefully, she was young, probably in her 30s, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders. Her nightgown was old-fashioned, the kind women might have worn in the 1940s or 50s. As I watched, she slowly turned her head toward the mirror, toward me. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the reflected light, and her eyes were dark and sad. She looked at me with an expression of such profound longing that I felt tears spring to my own eyes. She was beautiful, but there was something tragic about her, something that spoke of loss and unfulfilled desire. She raised her hand slightly, as if she were trying to wave, and I found myself raising my hand in response. For a moment, we stood there, two women separated by decades and the mysterious boundary between life and death, acknowledging each other across the impossible distance. Then she was gone. I spent the rest of the night researching the history of the house, trying to find out if anyone had died there, if there was some tragic story that might explain what I was seeing. But the records were sparse, and I couldn't find anything definitive. Over the next several weeks, my nighttime encounters with the woman in the mirror became routine. She would appear most evenings, always in the same spot on the bed, always wearing the same white nightgown. Sometimes she would look at me directly, sometimes she would seem lost in her own thoughts, staring at something I couldn't see. I started talking to her, just quiet conversations while I got ready for bed. I told her about my day, about the divorce, about how strange it was to be living alone again after so many years of marriage. She never responded, of course, but there was something comforting about her presence, as if she understood loneliness in a way that the living couldn't. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice changes in the mirror's behavior. The woman wasn't the only figure I was seeing anymore. Sometimes there would be others, a man in a dark suit standing by the window, an elderly woman sitting in the corner chair, children playing in the hallway behind me. The mirror was showing me a whole invisible world that existed parallel to my own, populated by people who had some connection to the house, to the mirror, or to me. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The breaking point came on a cold December evening, when I was getting ready for a date, my first since the divorce. I was standing in front of the mirror, putting on makeup, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, the woman in the white nightgown was there as usual, but she wasn't alone. Standing behind her, with his hands on her shoulders, was a man I recognized. It was my ex-husband, David. But David wasn't dead. I'd spoken to him just that morning about finalizing some paperwork. He was very much alive, living in another state, with his new girlfriend. Yet there he was in the mirror, standing behind the woman in the nightgown with an expression of possessive intimacy that I remembered all too well. I spun around, expecting to see him behind me, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, both figures were gone. I called David immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Rebecca, He sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? Where are you right now? I'm at home in Phoenix. Why are you alone? Yes, Jessica's at work. Rebecca, what's going on? You sound upset. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen without sounding insane. I had a strange dream about you. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine. Are you okay? You sound really shaken up. I told him I was fine and hung up. But I wasn't fine. I was terrified. If the mirror could show me David, if it could somehow reach across the country and pull his essence into my bedroom, then what else was it capable of? That night, I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror. I covered it with a sheet and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The woman in the nightgown, David standing behind her with his hands on her shoulders. It felt like a violation, like the mirror was showing me something private and disturbing. The next morning, I called Mrs. Chen. It took some effort to track her down, but I finally found her number through her daughter. When I explained who I was and that I was living in her old house, she was immediately interested. Oh, you're the one who kept the mirror, she said. I was hoping someone would appreciate it. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you about the mirror. I've been seeing things in it, and I need to understand what's happening. There was a long pause. What kinds of things? I told her about the woman in the nightgown, about the other figures, about seeing my ex-husband. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she sighed deeply. I was afraid of this, she said. The mirror has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother bought it in 1927, right after she moved to America. She said it was special, that it could show her family members who had passed on. Did you see things in it too? Oh yes, for years. I saw my grandmother, my parents, my husband after he died. It was comforting, mostly, but toward the end, before I moved out, it started showing me other things, disturbing things. What kind of things? People who weren't dead yet, living people from my past, people I hadn't thought about in years, ex-boyfriends, old friends, relatives I'd lost touch with. It was as if the mirror was reaching out across time and space, pulling in anyone who had ever been important to me. I felt a chill of recognition. Did you ever see them in real life? The living people? No, never. But I would call them just to check, and they would always tell me they'd been thinking about me, that they'd been having dreams about the house, about the mirror. It was connecting us somehow, creating links between people who were meant to be separate. Why did you leave it behind? Because I realized it wasn't just showing me the past anymore. It was trying to bring the past into the present. The mirror wanted to reunite me with everyone I'd ever lost, everyone I'd ever loved, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. It was trying to collapse time and space, to create a world where everyone I'd ever cared about could exist together. That doesn't sound so bad. It would have been beautiful if it were possible, but it's not. The mirror was starting to affect the living people it showed me. They were becoming obsessed with me, with the house, with the mirror itself. My ex-husband started driving by the house. Even though we'd been divorced for 20 years, old friends would call me in the middle of the night, saying they couldn't stop thinking about me. The mirror was pulling them in, making them part of its strange reality. I thought about my conversation with David, about how he'd sounded when I called him. Had there been something different in his voice? A note of concern that seemed disproportionate to our brief conversation. What did you do? I tried to break the mirror, but I couldn't. It's stronger than ordinary glass. I tried to get rid of it, but it would always find its way back to me. Finally, I realized the only way to stop it was to leave it behind with someone who could handle its power. Someone like me. I don't know if you can handle it, but you're young, you're strong, and you're alone. The mirror feeds on loneliness, on the desire for connection. As long as you can resist its pull, as long as you don't let it consume you, you might be able to contain it. And if I can't, then it will create its own reality around you, populated by everyone you've ever loved or lost. You'll never be alone again, but you'll never be free either. You'll become the center of a web of connections that spans time and space, and everyone caught in that web will be trapped there with you. I hung up the phone and stared at the sheet-covered mirror. I could feel it waiting beneath the fabric, patient and hungry, ready to show me whatever I most wanted to see. That night, I removed the sheet. The woman in the nightgown was there, but she wasn't alone. Standing around her were dozens of figures: my parents, my grandmother, old friends, ex-boyfriends, co-workers, neighbors. Everyone I'd ever had a meaningful connection with was there. gathered in my bedroom like guests at a reunion, and in the center of them all, looking directly at me with an expression of desperate longing, was David. Not the David from the mirror the night before, but the David I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago, young, handsome, full of hope and promise. The David who had loved me before our marriage turned bitter. Before we became strangers living in the same house, he reached out his hand toward the mirror, toward me, and I found myself reaching back. Our hands met against the glass, and for a moment, I felt the warmth of his touch, the connection I had been missing for so long. Behind him, all the other figures were reaching out too, their faces filled with love and longing. All I had to do was step forward, step through the mirror, and I would never be alone again. But I did in single quotes T. Instead, I pulled my hand away and covered the mirror again, because I understood now what Mrs. Chen had been trying to tell me. The mirror wasn't offering me connection, it was offering me a prison disguised as paradise. The figures I saw weren't really the people I loved. They were echoes, shadows, reflections of my own loneliness and desire. And if I gave in to them, if I let the mirror pull me into its impossible world, I would become just another reflection, another shadow for the next lonely person who found themselves standing in front of its silver surface. I've been living with the covered mirror for 6 months now. Sometimes I'm tempted to look, especially on the nights when the silence in the house becomes overwhelming. But I resist, because I know that the mirror is still there, still waiting, still hungry for the kind of connection that can only exist in the space between what is and what we wish could be. The woman in the nightgown is still there too, I think, still sitting on the bed, still waiting for someone to acknowledge her existence. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being seen, being known, is all any of us really want, even if it's only in the reflection of a mirror that shows us more than we're ready to see. These 3 stories share a common thread that goes beyond the supernatural. They're about the objects we bring into our most intimate spaces, the things we trust to be passive and harmless. A music box, a camera, a mirror, simple objects that we use every day, never suspecting that they might be windows into something far more complex and dangerous than we can imagine. But more than that, they're about the profound human need for connection, for understanding, for proof that we're not alone in this vast, indifferent universe. Clara's music box played because she needed someone to hear her story. The Polaroid camera revealed spirits because they needed someone to see them. The mirror showed reflections of love and loss because the lonely need to believe that somewhere, somehow, the people they've lost are still with them. The terrifying truth is that sometimes, when we're alone with our fears and desires, when we're most vulnerable and most desperate for connection, that's when these objects reveal their true nature. They feed on our loneliness, our longing, our willingness to believe in something beyond the mundane reality of our daily lives. And once they've made that connection, once they've shown us what we most want to see, they become part of us. We become part of them. The boundaries between the living and the dead, between the possible and the impossible, become blurred until we can no longer tell where we end and an object begins. If you've made it this far, if these stories have resonated with something deep inside you, then you understand. You know that feeling of being alone with something that shouldn't exist, something that watches you from the corners of your vision, something that whispers your name in the silence of your own home. I want to hear your stories, the objects in your life that seem to have minds of their own, the moments when you felt less alone than you should have been, the times when the boundary between the living and the dead has felt paper thin. Share them in the comments below, not just for me, but for everyone who needs to know they're not the only ones who've experienced the impossible. And if you found value in these stories, if they help you understand something about the nature of loneliness and connection, please hit that like button and subscribe to Dr. Bonechill. We're working toward 10,000 subscribers, and every one of you helps us reach people who need to know that they're not alone in their experiences with the unexplained. Because that's what this is really about, not just the horror, but the recognition that we're all connected by our fears, our desires, our willingness to believe in something beyond what we can see and touch and prove. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, sometimes the most frightening thing is also the most beautiful. The possibility that we're never truly alone. That's somewhere in the shadows and reflections of our daily lives, someone or something is watching, waiting, and caring about what happens to us. Thank you for listening. And remember, the next time you're alone with an object that seems just a little too aware of your presence, ask yourself, what is it trying to tell you? And more importantly, are you ready to hear the answer? This is Dr. Bonechill, reminding you that the most terrifying truths are often the ones we discover when we're completely alone.